This is a book. And 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 these are books. And all of these books have some features in common. They have pages, more or less, and they have a cover and a spine. Lots of them have illustrations. They all have words, or at least most of them do. They all represent a very specific formula that we have come to recognize as an irreplaceable and unmovable object in the course of human history. This is the book that I read. It's called The Book, a cover-to-cover exploration of the most powerful object of our time. This is a book about books, about the long, meandering, messy history behind this most common and essential of objects. This book is not about books in terms of the knowledge they contain or the way their contents can and regularly do rattle the foundations of our society. It's about books, the objects, fallible, physical, and profoundly complicated. The book is split into 4 parts: the page, the text, illustrations, and form, and that should tell you a lot about what this book is really about. You're halfway through the story before the human race has managed to invent paper and written language at the same time. We don't meet books in the modern sense until about 50 pages from the end. The book takes you through the many, many, many steps on the journey to the modern book. It talks about Egyptian papyrus and Chinese mulberry pulp paper, the Gutenberg press, and the invention of lithography, all the way down to an exploration of books in their contemporary form. If you've ever wanted to know how books ended up looking the way they do, like why they have that little mushroom shape at the spine, or what that thread on the top of a hardcover book is called, or why a lot of books have that curved edge to them, this is the book for you. One of the most incredible things about reading this book was gaining an understanding of just how hard it was to get to books. We had to work so hard for it. Papermaking alone is an incredibly complicated process, never mind all the mediums we had to go through before we got to paper. Maybe I was the only person who didn't fully realize that parchment wasn't old-timey paper, but was actually made out of animal skins, but please trust me when I say that you do not want to know more about how parchment was made. Libraries really don't feature at all, which made this a really great book to read for a library class. We're hovering at the edges of this particular story, hanging out in monasteries, stealing people's scrolls in Alexandria, that sort of thing. For the most part, this book concerns itself with everything that happens to books before they leave the printing press. So what can we take away from this book about books? What should we, as librarians, as punk-ass book jockeys, as information scientists, understand about the origin story behind this object? The first and really most obvious lesson from this book is just how important they are. We have this fascination with books that's almost been coded into our DNA. We get very romantic about it, going on and on about the smell of books and the feel of them in our hands. We take them so seriously. We're buried with them, we burn them, we turn them into new things when they get worn out, we make them big and small and every size in between. We also use them as a marker of status, as a way of proving to people that we're smart or cultured, or that we care about the right things or have interests in an impressive number of subjects. And for almost the entirety of human history, the only people who could get their hands on even just a writing utensil and something to write on, never mind a fully bound book, was restricted to scribes and monks and priests and scholars and royals, the holy, the wealthy, and the well-educated. And to a certain extent that's still true, at least in the sense of scale and global access. About a quarter of adults on this planet aren't able to read, and in our own communities we can see that kids in wealthier families have more books in the home, which we can trace as a marker for success later in life. Access to books and reading still have an immeasurable impact on people's lives, and for a great many people on this earth, it's a doorway that is kept far out of reach. Which is where we finally enter the story. If there's a good modern lesson to be found in this book full of history, it's the reminder that we as librarians have inherited a sacred task. We provide everyone, no matter who they are or where they came from, with access to books and stories and information. That's radical and huge and a responsibility that we should work hard not to take for granted. The second takeaway is a little bit more practical, and it's the important reminder that when we're talking about libraries, we have to think of books in practical terms. Books are physical objects that take up a certain amount of space and require very specific conditions to stay in good shape. And I think particularly for those of us in the public library field, where limited shelf space often has to take precedence over preservation, it's important to keep a very clear-headed perspective. Books age and wear out and have all manner of terrible things done to them from the first day we put them on our shelves, and it doesn't pay to get sentimental. When a book has lived its life, it's our job to shuffle it off this mortal coil so we can free up space for something more in demand, something with new information, or just something less gross. We're librarians. We love books. We don't want to see them suffer. But sometimes a book is more object than artifact, and oftentimes, that means letting go. And here's the last thought I'll leave you with. Books are important, except in the ways they aren't. Humans have spent the last several centuries painstakingly perfecting the art, the craft, and the science of bookmaking, and it is a science, absolutely. The history of books is littered with the techniques and technologies and failed experiments and convoluted inventions that made the modern book possible. And on every step of the way, from etching cuneiform into tablets and unwinding papyrus reeds, all the way up to the incredible industrial force that pumps out millions upon millions of new copies every year, we've always come up with something better. We always do. That's what we do. That's what we've always done. And hopefully that's what we always will do. Every time someone came up with a new way of making paper, or a new way of printing, or a new way of mixing ink, the old ways faded, either entirely into obscurity or into the more hallowed halls of tradition and ancestral history. This is an aside, but in case you were curious, we really don't know how to make papyrus, which was once one of the most ubiquitous writing surfaces in the world, because in the whole of recorded history, there was like one guy who bothered to write down how it was done, and he also wrote a lot about cyclopses, so, But that is the whole beauty of the industrious human spirit. We're never satisfied with just doing things the way we've always been done. We're always chasing after the next thing and the thing 3 things after that thing, and yes, it gets us into trouble sometimes or a lot of the time, but it's part of what makes us human. Which is why books aren't important. Because the whole point of books, the whole reason we spent so much time and energy trying to figure out how to make them work, wasn't because we wanted a pretty thing to sit on our shelves. That came later. That came after we started getting really good at it. We wanted what was between the covers, what the monks painstakingly traced by hand, what the printers lined up with every tiny metal for their presses, what we tap out on our keyboards and send flying through the digital sphere. The words, the information, the knowledge and the communication and the sharing and the learning. Everything this book is not really about, because at the end of the day, books are just the vessel. I mean, they're not just the vessel. I think we can give them a little more credit than that, but you get what I'm saying. Stephen Fry once said that books are no more threatened by Kindle than stairs by elevators. And I'm not sure that he's entirely right about that, but I think when we're looking to the future, that's the direction that we should be thinking. Stairs and elevators are 2 different ways of accomplishing the same task. One isn't better or worse than the other, and for some people, one or the other is the only way they ever can or want to accomplish that task. We need both. And when we're talking about the power of books, we have to remember where that power really lives. I'm going to leave you with the last paragraph of this book because it's such a perfect summation that nothing else could really do it justice. The book, along with the millions of other like it produced each year, is a solution to an equation that takes in more than 2,000 years of human history. It is rectangular because cows, goats, and sheep are rectangular too. It is a handy, right-sized volume like the Nag Hammadi codices because humans like books to be this size. It is an affordable octavo in the style of Aldous Manutius's groundbreaking pocketbooks, catering to the average wallet. And in the interests of standardization and automation, its folios are letter paper sized, a format that exists partly because of the reach of a Vatman's arms and partly because of the inventory concerns of an interwar government. Its letters, if not its language, would be as readable to a Carolingian monk as to a Renaissance scholar. It is protected by rigid boards like the St. Cuthbert Gospel. It is covered in a paper-wrapped cardboard case like George Rutledge's populist railway novels, and it is sewn together in a way that echoes both medieval bookmakers and the Industrial Revolution. Welcome to the book.